Welcome to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Stocks rise with encouraging news on the vaccine front and speculation that Congress is making progress on a new relief bill. Shares of Novavax jumping on early data that shows its vaccine candidate can not just fight COVID-19, but also block transmission. I sat down with Microsoft co-founder and co-chair of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Bill Gates, for a wide-ranging interview where we talked about his outlook on vaccines and the pandemic. The foundation has contributed almost $350 million to fight COVID-19 efforts around the world. We also talked about the possibility of Microsoft buying TikTok. We are standing by now for a news briefing with the president at the bottom of the hour. This after Secretary of State Mike Pompeo signaled the U.S. will try to ban other Chinese technology beyond TikTok in the name of national security. I want to get to Bloomberg's Nick Wadhams, who covers the State Department for us. And Nick, Secretary of State Pompeo signaling here that the U.S. would like to urge even Apple and Google from removing certain Chinese apps from their app stores, which would be quite dramatic. Talk to us about what exactly he's saying.
Right. I mean, at the moment, it looks like what Secretary Pompeo is doing is issuing a set of guidelines or recommendations, warnings, I guess, where he's telling app stores, listen, these Chinese apps, he mentioned specifically TikTok and WeChat, are not safe, and we don't think you should include them in your app stores. And he then also said, we don't think you should allow your apps to be included, pre-bundled into or pre-installed onto smartphones, Chinese smartphones, from Huawei and other Chinese companies. So these are not orders right now. He's not delivering an ultimatum, but what it does do is signal an expansion of this administration's war on these Chinese apps and an expansion of what the U.S. perceives as a national security threat. And according to some of the sources I spoke to within the State Department, a harbinger of what may be to come. So you could see them try to put teeth onto these recommendations with actual regulations that would restrict U.S. App stores from Google and Apple, for example, from including apps unless they give certain guarantees about protections of consumer data.
So that is the question, how these companies will respond, and also goes back to the central question of what power does the U.S. government and the president really have? Can the president force the sale of a Chinese company to a U.S. company or ban of a Chinese company? Does the power of the U.S. government really extend this far?
Right. It's a great question, and it's one that they have not definitively answered. We're expecting that the administration will announce a new series of regulations that gain their authority from a couple of executive orders that President Trump signed last year, one specifically on ensuring the safety of ICT supply chain. We do think they will put a little bit of teeth on this, but I think the big issue right now is, according to the administration, this is much more like, hey, if you're a U.S. company, you're sort of putting your finger in the air to test which way the wind is blowing. Well, Secretary Pompeo just gave you a very big hint of where they're headed, and they really want you to be much more guarded and careful about your willingness to have Chinese apps in the App Store.
All right, Bloomberg's Nick Wadhams. We're going to continue to follow this story as it develops. Thank you so much for that update. Now, to part of my wide-ranging interview with Bill Gates, of course, as we know, Microsoft is in talks to buy TikTok's U.S. operations. There are concerns that Microsoft could be too close to China, given Microsoft's long history of working in China. Here is what Gates had to say about how Microsoft would address the national security issues that have been raised.
Well, the whole situation is quite novel in terms of, what are the principles involved here? What principles should China apply to companies in China or the U.S.? Are those reciprocal and thought through and predictable? I'm not, at the company now. We've made investments in China. We have, engineers from all over the world, including in China. So Microsoft is very careful about its data promises, and we'll try to have strong relationships globally. We won't do things that are hostile, are viewed as hostile.
What about the app in general? Obviously, it's a very popular app. I mean, is this something that you would like to see in the Microsoft family?
Well, it's nice that TikTok's created some competition through innovation, and it doesn't seem like preventing that innovation from being available, that makes much sense when you want new things out there. I am not in the target audience, so I'm certainly not expert. I've gotten a lot of education from my youngest daughter about this and why she spends time on it. So, they did a great job on it, and there's a lot of ways to take it, and hopefully, that's allowed to happen in some form.
Let's talk about what's allowed. Is the Trump administration correct in trying to force this Chinese company, ByteDance, to sell TikTok's U.S. operations or even shut it down in the United States because it's Chinese? Should the company be subjected to that? I mean, 100 million Americans are using it.
What law? I mean, if this is such a clear thing, why wasn't it clear 3 months ago, 6 months ago? When people make investments, they should understand what's allowed, what's not allowed, and therefore what's the reciprocal principle involved in this thing. So, maybe I haven't read the right article. I don't understand what happened on Saturday, but anyway, I'm focused on the foundation and the pandemic, and I'll probably provide advice at some point, but I'm not at the center of this, the decision being made here.
I do want to quickly get your thoughts on the antitrust situation. Obviously, I'm sure that the hearings have been a bit of deja vu for you. Having gone through a lengthy review process yourself, do you look at companies like Apple and Amazon and Google and Facebook and think they've become too powerful?
Well, these companies are shaping the economy. So the idea that congressmen get a chance to talk to their leaders and try and understand how, what they're doing in terms of media and competition, that all makes sense. They were lucky there were 4 of them on the hot seat. I was all by myself with critics sitting next to me. So, hey, I guess we're getting nicer to CEOs than in the old days. I always felt going to Washington and talking about our values and what we did, was helpful, particularly, through this pandemic where these companies have done so well. Now understanding, what's it like to be an entrant into these markets. There's legitimate issues there that, in a kind of a scattershot way, did get raised.
More of my interview with Bill Gates coming up. He predicted a massive epidemic years ago. So what does he think will happen next? How promising do treatments and vaccines look to him now? We'll hear more from him on that in a moment. Also later in the show, a cloud player Rackspace goes public today. The CEO will be joining us next. We'll talk to him about rising concerns with data privacy and China in the cloud. This is Bloomberg. In 2015, Bill Gates predicted a massive epidemic was coming, and here we are. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has now committed more than $350 million to fight COVID-19 efforts around the world. I asked Gates how he believes the rest of the pandemic will play out. How long will this last? And when will we come out of it?
Well, fortunately, the innovation in diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines will get us largely out of this by the end of 2021. The therapeutics will start to cut the death rate, but the true end comes when, between natural infection and the vaccine, we have this herd immunity. And for rich countries, sometime next year, ideally in the first half.
So we're going to be okay? Is that what you're saying?
Well, we're certainly going to be okay. We're lucky this one wasn't a more fatal disease. I do think this time we'll pay attention and have the same type of practice and preparation. Some countries, did very, very well. The U.S. did not.
So your foundation has given more than $350 million now to fight COVID. You are backing a South Korean vaccine in particular. Why that vaccine? And are there any other vaccines out there that look promising to you?
We're behind a lot of different vaccines. We're funding manufacturing capacity in many different sites, particularly for AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, and Novavax. We may do that for some of the other vaccines, but those are the ones that are the most scalable, low cost, because we're trying to make sure we can end it not just in the rich countries, but also in the developing countries, and that benefits everyone if we achieve that. We're even asking the U.S. to contribute like they've done with other global health crises, which so far they haven't gotten around to that.
So how confident are you that we will have a working vaccine that can be distributed in mass quantities by the end of 2020?
Well, the initial vaccine, in terms of its effectiveness against sickness and transmission, won't be ideal. The phase 3 primary endpoint is for 50% effectiveness, and it may not have the long duration that one of the later constructs will. So some of those, particularly the more expensive ones, will mainly be used in the rich countries as a bit of a stopgap. We'd be lucky to have much before the end of the year, but then enough will complete that during the first half of next year, a number are very likely to get approved, and then we need to scale up. We need billions of doses to get the places that have a hard time doing the sheltering and are already so poor that the economics effects are quite dramatic. So it's the biggest challenge the global health community's ever faced. I think we'll rise to it, even though the right investments were not made, and in the case of the U.S. at least, the lack of organization around testing and trials has been very disappointing.
Now, for so many years, the so-called anti-vaxxers, people have said, well, if they lived through a pandemic like their grandparents did, they would think differently. Well, here we are, and the feelings haven't changed. How concerned are you about vaccine misinformation, and that so many people out there might just not get it, even if it is available?
Hopefully we'll have, people of both parties who are trusted, speaking out in a credible way, people who've been known to, admit mistakes and develop credibility over time with the various constituencies. But, you do have to worry because we do need a lot of people to take the vaccine to get that full herd immunity.
Should it be voluntary or should it be mandatory?
Well, making something mandatory can often backfire, even when you're doing a favor to the community. So I doubt, they'll choose that. You might say if you're going to work in an old folks' home or, have any exposure to elderly people, there might be some circumstances where it would be required.
What about schools? Should it be mandatory for kids going back to school?
Early on, I doubt that'll be a primary thing. I think, the teachers who are elderly or who live in multi-generational households where they necessarily have exposure to older people, they would be a good target. That's more leveraged than doing the full student body in the times when the vaccine is going to be scarce. As it gets more available, yes, you'd like to go for young people, particularly if one of the constructs is very good at transmission blocking.
Now, you already have countries like the United States that are moving to lock down vaccine supplies, buying up huge supplies of potential vaccines, buying up the gear needed to administer them. How harmful is that?
We're asking this vaccine, even if one company invents it, we're saying that they ought to let other companies do the manufacture. And I think it's really exemplary that a number of companies have committed to make this a non-profit activity, just break even, and for the poorest countries, just get their marginal cost. So we're part of funding those extra factories being built at risk, and so they'll be standing by for that approval. The U.S. as yet has not helped come up with procurement money for the poor countries to get access. It's possible that'll get into the supplemental bill. I'm encouraging Republicans and Democrats to include a total of $8 billion, half for therapeutics, half for vaccine, in whatever relief bill gets passed. So the U.S. doesn't look selfish. We deserve credit. We've funded more R&D than any country, but on factories and procurement, we've only taken care of ourselves. If we just add this, which is less than 1% of the bill, then it's a typical U.S. picture where we show up strategically, humanitarianly, and to help ourselves to avoid the disease coming back in a super effective way.
We talk a lot about vaccines, but less about therapeutics. What are you seeing in terms of promising treatments out there for this horrible disease? I wonder if drugs are going to play a more important role here than we know.
Oh, absolutely. And it's easier to trial drugs, although the U.S. has been very disorganized on this. We used a UK trial that we funded part of to prove out dexamethasone. Gilead had enough proof on remdesivir to move ahead with that. There's 2 other antivirals coming that actually are orally available, so better in some respects. There's monoclonal antibodies coming, and then there's quite a few additional immune modulators. And so between those different classes of drugs, we should be able to drop the death rate a lot. It's already dropped quite a bit as doctors have realized not to use the ventilator as much, to use oxygen earlier, to use the prone position, and the 2 drugs, dexamethasone and remdesivir, that we have. But before the end of the year, we'll have monoclonal antibodies, and those could be quite dramatic in their benefits.
There's a lot of bad information about therapeutics out there. Debunk some of the myths for us, hydroxychloroquine being one of them.
Well, this is an age of science, but sometimes it doesn't feel that way. Just the idea is about testing and hydroxychloroquine. The numbers are quite clear. It got confused because the trials were done so poorly, but there's lots of good things coming in the therapeutic area that are really proven to work without the severe side effects. So, a little bit slow, but a lot of good news to come in that domain.
There are some raging internet conspiracy theories out there about you wanting to implant chips in people via a vaccine, and you are the center of some, frankly, ludicrous narratives. Does that upset you personally? How do you feel about all that?
Well, it's kind of strange because they take the fact that I'm involved with vaccines. That part's true. It involves saving millions of lives for lots and lots of different diseases, including, HIV and malaria. They just reverse it, that instead of giving money to save lives, I'm, making money to get rid of lives. Just by inverting it and ascribing ill intent, it takes this complex situation that was unexpected and may, make it feel like it's more understandable. If that stops people from taking the vaccine or, looking at the latest data about how they should behave, including wearing a mask, then that's a big problem. I wouldn't have expected this. It's just, a bit strange that it's been politicized and the conspiracy people have had a heyday.
We will have much more of that conversation with Bill Gates to come. But first, Rackspace went public today, backed by sponsor Apollo. Shares of the cloud service provider, though, going in the wrong direction, pricing at the bottom of the range and dropping at the opening bell. Rackspace did see a spike just before the close, but still down over 20% for the day. Joining us to discuss, Rackspace CEO Kevin Jones. So, Kevin, what's your take on what happened here and why investors received it this way?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Emily, for having me on. So look, we've been very pleased overall with how the IPO process has gone. We've got a great group of initial investors. You kind of keep in mind, this is one of the largest tech IPOs of the year. So we're actually just thrilled to have reached this milestone, excited to be in the public markets. Today is day one. We're not, focused on today's stock price. We're focused on creating value over the long term for our customers and our shareholders and extending our position as the leading pure play multi-cloud company.
It is one of the worst IPO showings for the year, though, so certainly you do have something to prove. One of the criticisms has been since you were taken private in 2016 that not a lot has changed. You've said that you now don't compete with AWS, Microsoft, Google. What has changed in your view over the last few years?
Yeah, so we are a completely transformed company actually in the last 4 years. One of the changes you mentioned prior to the take private in 2016, we competed with AWS and the hyperscalers. Today, we do not compete with them. AWS, Microsoft, Google are our strongest partners, along with VMware. VMware is an amazing partner as well. Another thing that's changed with the company, we've actually done 4 acquisitions that have revolutionized the solutions we offer. We now offer application solutions. We're deep into security solutions. We're now into the public sector, into the government market. With the acquisition that we did of Annika in December, which has gone spectacularly well, we're now consolidating kind of our leadership position in the public cloud ecosystem. So, the company's much different. We now have 120,000 customers in 120 countries. We're expanding rapidly geographically. And just to if you just look at the results, right? If you look at our sales results in the second quarter, our sales grew 107% in the second quarter. We've got accelerating revenue growth, helping our customers navigate the maze of multi-cloud complexity.
The cloud is becoming, an even more controversial space, and I'm curious, given how much of our data is housed there and the administration's rising concerns about national security and China, what is your take on all of this as these data and privacy issues evolve? Is the U.S. taking the right position here?
Yeah, look, I mean, this is it's a great question, and as it relates to multi-cloud, one of the things, not just the public sector, but even private sector companies want to make sure of is, will my data be secure, right? Companies invested lots of R&D, and they want to make sure that their data, their tools, their intellectual property will be protected. So, security is absolutely paramount, right? But this is an ongoing situation, right? The bad guys keep getting more sophisticated. The hacking attempts occur even more frequently. In the pandemic, we've seen hacking attempts into our customers' environments increase 300%. But at the same time, we've got incredible innovations by firms like Rackspace Technology, as well as the hyperscalers and other firms. So look, I do think we're on the right track. Day by day, it's a battle that really, though, has to be won in the trenches.
So what's next when it comes to that battle? Where are you being most vigilant?
Look, when it comes to security, there's a few areas. Data governance and security is absolutely critical. Having the proper design of the security environment and the strategy kind of laid out and bought in by the board and the management team of our customers is absolutely critical. Having active management of the incidents, in a methodical and operational way is also critical. Making sure that all of the virus protection is done in customers' environments, right? That's another thing that can just harden the security environments of customers. And then finally, making sure you partner with best-of-breed technology providers like us.
Right.
Certainly, since we've moved into this leadership position in multi-cloud, it's been really, really important for us to enhance our security, which
we'll have to leave it there. Kevin, we're running into a hard break. Kevin Jones, CEO of Rackspace. Coming up, Dr. Anthony Fauci joins us. His take on the latest state of the pandemic next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. Well, imitation is sometimes the sincerest form of flattery, and social media is no exception. Facebook's Instagram has launched its TikTok competitor, or some might say clone, in more than 50 countries. Bloomberg's Sarah Fryer joins us now to discuss. Sarah, should I say things are about to get reals?
Good pun, Emily. It is
I couldn't
definitely
resist.
a very strange timing for the Reels launch. It comes as really the U.S. government is threatening TikTok's very existence. It comes 1 week after Mark Zuckerberg testified in Congress for concerns of antitrust and copying of competitors. He was just interrogated about whether and how often Facebook tries to copy its competitors. So I think that this, it's as good a moment as any to throw it out there and try to take advantage of the teens who have nowhere to go if TikTok gets banned. They are already flocking to Instagram, from what they've told us.
So the product, just to be clear, is called Reels, Reels. How does it actually compare to TikTok?
It is almost exactly the same functionality. The complicated part is it's embedded within Instagram. So it's not its own app. You actually have to find it separately. You can find people's Reels on the Instagram Explore tab. And Instagram is saying that this is going to be an opportunity for creators on Instagram to get famous in a way that's new. That on the Explore tab, people who are not already following them, they follow them.
Well, and this is an interesting question. We can't imagine that Facebook. Okay. We can't imagine that Facebook would try to buy TikTok now that it's up for sale in some sense, because that would certainly raise some antitrust flags. But let's say that Microsoft acquires TikTok's U.S. operations. What does that mean for Facebook's attempts to chase TikTok?
I think that would be good news for Facebook, and I'll tell you why. The company is under mounting antitrust scrutiny from not just Congress and the FTC, but the DOJ and state attorneys general. And having your fastest growing competitor owned by a U.S.-based company that is more valuable than Facebook would be a great counter-argument to all of that pressure.
All right, Bloomberg's Sarah Fryer, a battle we will continue to follow. Thank you so much for that update. All right, now, the U.S. is currently testing about 750,000 people a day for COVID-19. And with that comes concerns about how slow getting the results can be. Earlier this afternoon, Bloomberg's David Weston spoke with Dr. Anthony Fauci, director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, and of course, a huge spokesperson in the midst of this pandemic. He asked what we can do to get the country to where we need to be on testing. Take a listen.
Admiral Giroir and his colleagues, they give some statistics that a substantial proportion of the tests come back in 24 to 48 hours, mostly 48 hours. There's a certain percentage that take 5, 6, 7 or more days. You are absolutely correct. And I can't credibly defend that and say that's a good thing. It's not, because if you have to wait that long, particularly if the testing is done to really determine if you are infected and would you be infecting somebody else, that's an unreasonable amount of time to wait. And it kind of obviates the underlying reason for doing the test, which means we need to do better. We need to get 95 or more percent, 99% of the tests that need to be done back within that period of 24 to 48. No excuses. It needs to be done.
Shouldn't that be done on a federal level as a practical matter? I mean, there may be problems in enforcing things like mask wearing and things like that. Why don't we have a national policy, a national approach to testing? We have money in the stimulus bill that's being debated right now on Capitol Hill for that. Are we doing enough as a federal government to fix this problem?
Yeah, what we depend on here in the United States is the private enterprise, the various independent companies that make it and distribute it. And that's just the system the way it works. I'm not sure. We do have public health groups that get testing from the public health system, but the ones that really drive it are the private enterprise.
And is that effective? Is that the way we're going to beat this thing, as you say, over the long time?
I mean, obviously we need to do better because, I mean, even though we are much, much better off now than we were in the beginning where we had some missteps, at the end of the day, when you make phone calls and you hear that it's taking X number of days to get back, it clearly means we need to do better.
What is the role of information in fighting this pandemic as a practical matter? I mean, and particularly consistent information, because we are sort of getting conflicting messages from the parents. So if you forgive that analogy, we kids out here. I mean, for example, President Trump on hydroxychloroquine just the day before yesterday said, you know, I really believe it's very effective. He went after Dr. Birx. What can we do to get everybody on the same page? Because we don't know. We're not infectious disease experts. We're trying to figure out how to comply. We need a consistent message. How can we get to that world?
I think when you're dealing with things that are purely medical, I mean, remember, when you talk about the situation we're in now, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and we have other considerations that have to do with economic and political and other things. I have nothing to do with that. If you're talking about a medical question, listen to the medical experts. That's the advice. And you will not get a conflicting message from the medical experts about things like hydroxychloroquine, about what the results of a vaccine trial are, or what the results of monoclonal antibodies. So when it comes to pure public health medical things, listen to what the medical experts say.
We have an election coming up November 3rd. If we are as a nation in the same place November 3rd as we are right now, as a public health matter, understanding their political considerations, right, as a public health matter, would you advise people to stay home and vote by mail?
No. I think if you look at what people do, I mean, and we hope we're not shut down by then, and I don't think we should be or would be shut down, that you see when you go into a store, whatever that store is, you know, a CVS, the drugstore or a Starbucks or what have you, they have people staying 6 feet apart with masks. I think if you stay 6 feet apart with masks, you can do whatever it is that you need to do, whether you're going to CVS, whether you're going to Starbucks, or whether you're voting. I don't see any reason not to do that.
Dr. Anthony Fauci there. Coming up, Uber earnings later this week, and ride-hailing has taken a backseat to food delivery. Uber stock has hit the ceiling. We will discuss next. This is Bloomberg. More of my exclusive interview now with Bill Gates, who has a book coming out early next year called How to Avoid a Climate Disaster, a disaster he thinks could be bigger than COVID-19 itself. I asked him why. Take a listen.
Well, certainly climate change will make entire ecosystems die off. It'll make parts of the world impossible to live in. And so the actual economic and death toll from climate change will be much, much, much greater than what we have with this pandemic. It's delayed in time, so the current effects aren't as severe. There aren't, 150,000 deaths in the U.S. this year related to climate change. So this is an acute problem, but with a clear solution. And you can go back to normal. Whereas climate change, the scale of the changes required takes decades of invention and decades of scaling out. Perhaps some of the investment restructuring that various countries do after the pandemic to rebuild their economies can have this as a theme. But, like other important causes, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that this also was predictable, and the damage will be very, very large.
And if we don't solve the climate problem, do you believe there will be more pandemics, worse pandemics in the future?
Well, that's not the only thing. You'll have incredible instability because your ability to grow food in large parts of the world will be so diminished that you literally have hundreds of millions of migrants, and you won't have a thriving global economy because you will have degraded the ecosystems. And there is no quick fix to that thing, unlike the magic vaccine that's a mere year to 2 years at most to come up with.
The world has changed so much since you and Melinda put out your annual letter, and I wonder, what are the other issues out there that you worry are being sidelined because we're so focused on fighting COVID? Where are we taking our eye off the ball?
Yeah, just today I was sending out a letter to other people who've donated to polio eradication and talking to them about how the distraction, which is understandable, has been a huge setback where we thought we were within a couple of years. And so sadly in Africa, there'll be a lot more deaths just from the impact on the health system and how that raises death rates for other diseases, way more than the direct effect of COVID itself.
How extreme do you think inequality could get?
Well, inequality between countries is quite extreme. The toughest places in Africa are, you have a hard time surviving and getting enough to eat, and your kids in many locations, the majority, their brain never develops, they grow up stunted, and so the human potential is not there, and you're caught in a trap of instability and malnutrition. We're down to from 10% to 5% of children dying before the age of 5. Now that'll go back up maybe to 6 or 7%, but give us 3 or 4 years, we'll get back on track with that if it hasn't ended the kind of generosity and funding of innovation that's been key to that progress.
Not every billionaire is as generous as you, though, despite your urgings. What are some other ways you think we could narrow the inequality gap? How would you feel about a return to a wealth tax that could combat that?
I've got on my website a lot of ideas for collecting more taxes from the rich that I don't specifically involve a wealth tax because I think there are challenges with that. But anyway, we can have a more progressive tax system without killing the wonderful risk-taking entrepreneurialism in this country. You can have tax systems that, in my personal opinion, go too far, but we're not at that limit, particularly for capital gains type income. So yes, governments, if they realize that money isn't free, which macroeconomic conditions are confusing some people about that, at least temporarily, we will need taxes to make up for the resources, because this pandemic, even just within the country, whether it's low-income families, minority families, kids in the inner city, it sadly has exacerbated almost all the inequality in the society. If you're in a suburban school or private school, the online thing is actually not doing all that badly. Whereas if you're a young kid in the inner city, it's not accessible.
I'm not sure what's more terrifying, schools reopening or schools not reopening. I'm in a state where my schools aren't reopening. Should schools reopen right now? And if they don't, is that a year of lost learning for our children?
For kids up through even 8th grade, the data suggests that if you make sure that you give the elderly teachers or teachers who live in a multi-generational household and therefore necessarily exposed to elderly people, if you figure out how to, have them work at the remote high school level and bring in younger teachers without those risks, I do think there's a huge benefit for the younger people. So we ought to be talking more about some age distinctions here. In places with the heavy epidemic, which sadly in the U.S. is a lot of places, high school and college are not going to get organized enough, and the disease transmission rate is much higher as you get up, past, say, 14 or 15. So, it's everybody's scrambling because This is all being done so much at the last minute where
my administration's actions.
Bill Gates there listening to
American
the president
workers
who's
as we
just
battle
started
the
speaking.
China virus. Since the virus escaped China, my administration has enacted $3 trillion in economic relief. It's been very, very successful, and you saw that by the numbers that were issued yesterday and the day before. As to used car sales and auto production, they've been incredible numbers, actually, shockingly incredible. We've been negotiating in good faith with Democrat leaders in the House to extend relief payments. We're negotiating right now as we speak, and we'll see how that works out. But if Democrat leaders put partisan demands aside, we would reach an agreement very quickly. It would happen very quickly. In the meantime, my administration's exploring executive actions to provide protections against eviction. Eviction's a big problem, very unfair to a lot of people. It wasn't their fault that this virus came from a faraway land, as well as additional relief to those who are unemployed as a result of the virus. Very importantly, I'm also looking at a term-limited suspension of the payroll tax, something that has great support from many, many sides, especially some of our top economists and some people that we have great respect for. So we're looking at a suspension of the payroll tax. The Democrats are primarily interested in a $1 trillion bailout of the poorly run states. We have some states and cities, you know them all. We don't have to go through names, but they've been very poorly run over the years. And we can't go along with the bailout money. We're not going to go along with that, especially since it's not COVID related. Earlier today, I met with a great governor, Arizona Governor Doug Ducey. He's really done a fantastic job beyond even the COVID situation, which you've been reading about as it pertains to Arizona. A state that is a model for applying a science-based approach to the decreasing cases and hospitalizations without implementing a punishing lockdown. Arizona's record in reducing the spread of the virus while maintaining hospital capacity and allowing society to continue functioning and functioning very nicely, very successfully, is an example that shows how our path forward can work in other states. Arizona has a record, and a record really to be proud of. It's reduced the number of daily new cases by over 75%, cut the positivity rate in half, and reduced ER visits by 2/3, all the while keeping the economy functioning and functioning really well. When cases surged in June, the Vice President and Dr. Burke visited Arizona to consult with Governor Ducey. They had long consultations with Governor Ducey and his staff, and the Vice President has been in constant contact ever since. My administration is also collaborating with the state and local officials across the South and Midwest to provide similar guidance. We had a great relationship with the representatives in Arizona, and it's been such a successful endeavor. The federal government has supplied or delivered more than 400 million pieces of personal protective equipment to Arizona, along with nearly 70,000 vials of remdesivir. We've provided over $18 billion in economic support to Arizona, including more than $8.6 billion to support over 80,000 small businesses. So we really have been helping Arizona, and it's gotten tremendous results. Our goal is to protect the most vulnerable, increase recovery rates, you know that, and it's something so important, and prevent hospital overcrowding, all the while avoiding the kind of stringent lockdowns that would inflict substantial suffering. In this phase of the battle, we have the tools, resources, and knowledge to implement a targeted approach as we race to deliver a vaccine. And we are really working very hard on the vaccine, and I think they're doing a fantastic job. I've been meeting with officials of some of the greatest companies in the world, been meeting with scientists, and they're They're getting very close. If not there, they're getting very close. They're testing. Any proper analysis of infection control measures must take into account the short-term and long-term public health harms, including death caused by a far-reaching shutdown. When you shut down, you have many, many things that happen, from suicides to depression to drinking, alcohol problems to drug problems to problems with marriages. That you have people confined to their house, their apartment, for long periods of time. You cause a lot of problems with that also. Instead, Arizona's adopted the following measures. The governor advised residents to aggressively social distance when possible and maintain strict hygiene. The state encouraged mask use in crowded public places, especially when social distancing is not possible. The governor also exercised his discretion to restrict capacity at indoor locations to limit the possibility of super spreading. It's a big thing. My administration surged treatments. We got them a lot of treatments and therapies to the state, including nearly 70,000 vials of remdesivir, enough to treat over 11,000 patients, and it's been very successful, I might add. My administration also delivered PPE and point-of-care testing to over 100 Arizona nursing homes. In total, the federal government has provided massive amounts of masks and equipments and gowns, and you know some of those numbers. But Arizona was a very big beneficiary, and they very much really appreciated. More than 1,000 National Guard and medical personnel have also been deployed in Arizona, and they've really helped. They've been terrific, and I want to thank them. They have been brave and brilliant, combination of both. We also supported our tribal communities. The tribal communities were hit very, very hard. Governor Ducey and I personally delivered rapid testing systems to the Navajo Nation, which has been really in originally bad shape and now getting better and very, very quickly. The Navajo Nation now has one of the highest levels of testing per capita anywhere in the world. We really worked very hard on the tribal areas and in particular, in this case, the Navajo Nation. They've done incredibly well. Overall, Arizona has conducted over 1.1 million tests, more than the entire nations of Japan, Mexico, and Switzerland. Arizona's per capita testing is higher than Germany, South Korea, France, and Canada. And tribal governments in Arizona have received nearly $1.3 billion for the coronavirus relief fund. Meanwhile, outdoor dining, limited indoor dining, and most of the other businesses in Arizona have remained open and very vibrant. They're doing incredibly well. This is an approach, and it's an approach that's been incredibly successful. Arizona has been able to protect high-risk populations and quickly bring its outbreak under control without the need to impose overly punitive measures. Thanks to advances in treating the virus, the fatality rate across all age groups in Arizona is very low. Arizona's scientific and data-driven strategy also preserved hospital capacity, ensuring that those who need care were able to receive it and receive it immediately, very quickly. At the peak, approximately 15% of beds remained available statewide. That was at their peak, with roughly 20% of all occupied beds going to patients hospitalized for the virus. They kept other things going. They kept other forms of operations going. They kept elective surgery going. Did a really amazing job. Today, only 6% of the current hospitalizations in the state are related to the China virus. Arizona has also demonstrated success in protecting the state's African-American population. Only 5% of patients hospitalized were African-American, and African-Americans represent just 2% of all deaths from the virus. As it has worked to contain its outbreak, Arizona has also been formulating a plan to get children safely back to school as soon as possible. We want our schools open all over the country. We want our schools open. Arizona's worked very hard on this, and they're doing very well. The Department of Education is providing Arizona schools with $625 million. They're working very hard, and that's in conjunction with CARES funding. My administration is actively working with other states in the same way we worked with Arizona. In recent weeks, members of the coronavirus task force have visited over 15 states to encourage them to follow our path forward, including Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia, Indiana, and Ohio. And I'll be going to Ohio tomorrow. I look forward to it very much. It's a great place and a great state with an excellent governor, and we look forward to being there tomorrow. Next week, Dr. Burke, we'll be visiting Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. And also, I believe they're trying to get in West Virginia, a great place, a great state, and I'm sure that will happen because we'd like it to happen. They'd like to see her. So we're going to try very hard to get the doctor to West Virginia in addition to those states to deliver aggressive, tailored, and targeted guidance. The strategy we're taking to these states will protect those at highest risk while allowing others at a lower risk